All right, today is Sunday, July 25th, 2021, and this is episode 257 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Jerry. How you feeling? I know you weren't feeling so good last week, and we had to postpone.
Yeah, so I will tell you, I've had pneumonia a bunch of times in my life. This is the first time I've had it since I've been in my 40s. It is a very different experience to have pneumonia in your 40s.
Can I suggest not having it?
I think that's a great idea.
It's kind of scary.
I really should have listened to that advice.
But you're feeling better?
Yeah, feeling better. I've been on pretty hardcore antibiotics for almost a little over a week, and I'm not sure if those are worse than the sickness or not.
Right. So that's not code for meth.
No, not no.
Speed or whatever you executives take these days to keep your edge.
No, that's
what is it? Adderall? What is the
caffeine?
Caffeine. Old school.
Large quantities of caffeine. That's what we take.
Fair enough. Anyway.
So just a reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers.
Indeed. But for enough money, boy, could they.
That is correct. All right. So before we get into the stories for today, I do want to say just a reminder. Thank you to all of our Patreon donors who have stuck with us, new and old. Thank you very much.
Yes, very much so. Thank you.
All right. So jumping in, the first story comes from The Record, which is Recorded Futures blog. Title is "Using VMs to Hide Ransomware Attacks is Becoming More Popular." I think we may have talked about this back when it was first discovered with Ragnar. But the point here is it's being seen more and more in different types of ransomware. And kind of the long and the short of it is that the adversary will spin up a VM, typically used by installing something like VirtualBox or Hyper-V or what have you, and they will, which gives them a platform that typically is outside the purview of the endpoint detection tools that you have on your systems, and so it gives a quote safe space for the ransomware code to run in. Obviously the bad guys will map network drives into the virtual machine. Virtual machine is able to access those files, encrypt them outside the watchful eye of your security software. So interesting attack technique. Obviously I think there's a nascent industry around introspection of the happenings inside virtual machines, but probably the more important thing from my perspective is like making sure that if your system shouldn't have virtual machines running on it, that it can't.
Yeah, something like an app whitelist app.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about it too, because my first gut reaction was, wait a minute, what's allowing a VM to talk to the host hard drives? And I was like, oh yeah, they own the VM, so they own the hypervisor, so
that's right.
They can turn that on, right? As it's a feature. So that that's one thing. I was thinking app whitelisting or allow listing to be more politically correct might be one solution. Another is perhaps looking for, like with an EDR endpoint monitoring, to watch for some sort of VM software starting up.
Right.
And alert on that, catch it early before it spreads, hopefully. But I mean, it could also, if they're smart, get it spread out and already have AD permissions, Active Directory admin rights, and get it all spread out before they turn up one machine with the actual encryptor. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It goes back down to locking down your hosts, which that sucks for people who don't want to have to go through all those hoops to just turn on a VM to test something. But if it's being used for maliciousness, we got to weigh that out against productivity.
Yeah, absolutely.
So interesting. Interesting evolution. It always evolves.
Yeah. They will keep finding new and novel ways to evade.
The other thing that's interesting, it's maybe a really bad thing, but you could turn off the VM extensions in the BIOS for your CPU. And in fact, I recently built a new box and I started up Docker or something. It was like, sorry, this doesn't work. You don't have your VM extensions on. I was like, what? And I had to go to the BIOS and turn it on. So, again, you're limiting the capability of the box, but I'm kind of wondering, I don't know, maybe that's a methodology to limit it. But again, your users can't then ever use VM software if you've got it shut off at the BIOS, depending on what they're running. So
it raises an interesting point that if you're relying on app whitelisting and you have employees, especially if you think about like Mac workstations, Mac, a lot of businesses let their employees run Windows VMs inside like something like Parallels or VMware or VirtualBox, and if that's like BAU allowed, it becomes much more difficult because you can't use a blunt instrument like app control to block the hypervisor. You have to find some finer grained way of blocking unauthorized virtual machines.
Or alert for it. I don't know.
Right.
That could become... But if you suddenly see 500 VM hypervisors spin up in your environment, might be too late, but I don't know. I go back to how, if we can't stop it, how we can catch it before it spreads too far.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows? I also, just because we're pretty heavy on ransomware stories this week, I also wonder if this is a bit of an over-rotation on the InfoSec press into ransomware, and how likely are we to see this VM technique? I don't know, but it's interesting. Could grow, could just be a flash in the pan.
Yep. Well, I think it depends on, honestly, if this is the only way for the ransomware software to run in an environment, then I think we're going to see a lot wider adoption.
Yeah. It's all about what's effective and what allows them to get the money out. So, one more interesting technique to know about, but I guess not one I would be on fire about yet.
All right, so keeping with our theme of ransomware, the next story comes from the Errata Security blog, which is our former colleague Rob Graham's blog, and the title is Ransomware, and then it's some French stuff that I'm not even going to try to pronounce in my southern dialect here. So the long and the short of his post here, which is I think pretty good, that cybersecurity in quotes hasn't really failed. It hasn't been the failure of cybersecurity, said differently, isn't the thing that is causing the ransomware epidemic. It's our inability to protect administrators, and specifically administrative accounts, and even more narrowly, my arch nemesis, Active Directory domain admins.
Indeed.
So
yeah, it's a good blog, and
really
he jumps in. Yeah, and Rob's a good guy. I like Rob. A lot of people get frustrated with Rob's tweets, but I think he's a very interesting thinker. And even when he's saying things that people don't agree with, his logic is usually interesting enough to contemplate. So, and that being said, he has a really interesting post here, and he starts it off with something about, he hears a lot of platitudes, in his opinion, about how we stop ransomware by doing the basics better and cyber hygiene, which I'm absolutely guilty of. I say that a lot myself too. And I have a bit of a retort to that. But he's also very not wrong in saying, you can do that all day long, but what's really the big mountain to climb for these guys is getting those AD admin rights. And if you can stop that, then you really hobble them. Now, The thing I would say in reply to, you know, the basics and the cyber hygiene being a bit of a platitude is keep in mind we still have to get the initial ransomware compromise or the initial foothold in the environment, and that's where I think the better hygiene can come into play. But he's right. Once it's in, we need to do a far better job, I think, of defending admin rights. Sorry, I jumped on your thoughts,
No,
but that
no, it's
kind of
you're absolutely right. I think that it comes down to that there's an arbitrarily large number of ways of the initial infection, and he points out that the problem we have with these kind of contemporary ransomware attacks is not that Jerry's workstation got ransomware and Jerry's files were encrypted. That's not the problem that we're dealing with. The problem that we're currently dealing with is that these ransomware gangs get in, they find a toehold, and they continue to elevate the permissions till they get domain admin rights or some other equivalent administrative privileges, and they go after effectively the entire organization in one fell swoop. So they're really attacking the organization as a whole or large parts of it, and the only way they can do that effectively is using some type of administrative rights, and most commonly that's with Active Directory. He also points out down towards the bottom. He points out that he understands the attack techniques, but it's pretty transparent that he doesn't understand the defense techniques. And I this is something that comes up every now and then. It's like a strobe light to me, but the pulses of the strobe sometimes are months long. For a long time, Microsoft had this concept called Red Forest, and eventually that morphed into they called it something else, Enhanced Security Admin Environment. It was a way of configuring Active Directory domain controllers and separating forests out, so you had effectively unprivileged or lesser privileged parts of your forest and more highly privileged and much more highly protected portions. But I was surprised to see that has morphed, and Microsoft is no longer recommending that concept, and they actually now have something called the privileged access strategy. And I have not yet had a chance to read through the details, but it looks like it's about a year or two old. So interesting stuff. The thing that was in the back of my mind as I was reading his post here is that a lot of the problems we have are because we have designed, we've leveraged technology. By we, I mean like IT people, leverage technology in a way that makes their job and administration and whatnot convenient. And a lot of times, the way to configure and secure these technologies makes it less convenient and less scalable, less efficient. And so there's kind of a tension there.
Yeah, I think you're right. I would also echo what I see is that security is often very far away from these AD servers and their configuration, in part because if you look at how an admin team running the AD servers can be measured and judged, it's based on uptime and availability. And those AD servers are central to running the Windows environment. So they're very protective of anything that could be a threat to their uptime and availability, which is often in contention with perceptions around security.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if I go back to what I think Rob is saying here, we need to do a far better job of locking down those admin creds. And there absolutely are ways to do it. I don't think many organizations implement it for lots of different reasons, like you were just talking about, and I see as well in those admins being very concerned about security breaking it. Something as simple as turning off an older version of NTLM. There might be an epic amount of pushback because they don't know what it's going to break necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Yet we know how vulnerable NTLM is, especially old versions. And I think, security guys and the AD admin guys are not usually very chummy. And I've not seen a lot of large organizations, at least, really embrace hardening those AD servers. The guys who run them every day are being judged and motivated in different areas, and they don't necessarily see those risks at all. Certainly not the way security sees it. And security usually is held at bay with uptime and stability concerns on those AD servers. Right. I've had interesting conversations where somebody wanted to put an agent on an AD server to help a security tool with identifying a user map back to an IP address. And even that can cause an immense fight because they just are that protective of the sanctity of those AD servers. But as we see, it's also our Achilles heel. And it is something that is attacked so often and so regularly that maybe that really needs to change. And we really need to get a lot closer and collaborate a lot more on that.
Yeah, he raises a one point related to the recent print nightmare debacle. And the U.S. government released I think it was CISA, released some instructions that ordered every government entity who was running Active Directory domain controllers to disable print spoolers on the domain controllers. And Rob's point was, why were print spoolers ever running in the first place?
Well, that's old school IT thinking. That was your centralized, administrative and support server for your environment. Yeah, you should separate it out, though.
Agreed, but I guess my point is, it's not even all about installing new software. It's just kind of doing the whole least privilege type thing. And I've been, so this has been something that I've been thinking a lot about. And if you think about it in macroeconomic terms, the takeaway for me is on this post, and I think we've talked about this in the past, but to run IT, there's certain metrics that you can apply, like the cost per head count, or the percentage of revenue of a company that's dedicated to IT, and there's bunches of different metrics like that, and I think where we've landed is we're trying to continually squeeze the money out of IT. And I can't help but think that in order to operate environments in a more or less intrinsically secure or reasonably secure manner, using some of the basic technologies like Rob is describing here, like port filtering and network segmentation and whatnot. Doing that, it's not magic, it's not rocket science, but it makes IT less efficient.
Yeah.
You have to have necessarily more IT people if you have port filtering on and
yeah, in general, security is a drag on efficiency.
Right. So
Yeah.
we either have to. I mean, there's. I'm kind of thinking of it in like the old project management terms, the triad. The time, scope, and resources. And I suspect very strongly that there's a similar kind of a balance here between efficiency, security, and capability. And we're going to have to we're going to have to come up with technologies that are much more efficient and operate securely, or we're going to have to accept that we're going to be breached or cost more.
Do you think part of the challenge with this particular one is that default configuration is too loose on things like AD server and AD admin And like the options are there, but they're optional to harden it and turn it on, and that most just don't, and that out of the box is just too loose for
I think so.
reasons.
I think so. And, he points out that there's a lot of good stuff. It's not a very long article, but it was very thought-provoking for me, at least. And maybe it's the cough syrup I'm on. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be.
It could be.
You know, one thing that he didn't put in here that I think is relevant is I saw he tweeted this not too long ago was, if you really want to get good at this, hire a good pen tester, tell them to get AD admin rights, and see how they do it, and fix that, and do it again, and fix that, and do it again, and fix that. Right? Don't do it just once, and see how they do it, and that'll start to open your mind.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not cheap, but it's real world. And sometimes, as much as I hate to say it, sometimes you got to show the executives with a pen test, even if you know better.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of value in that. Anyway, where I was going, that there's some comments he makes earlier in the post about following different standards, like ISO or NIST. And the problem I have with those, and I think this is what he's pointing out too, is they're very subjective. Like, how do you know if you've properly segmented your network? Right? I mean, what does that mean?
Well, clearly, then you have no hacker, so you have proven a negative.
Yeah. So,
What?
but that's the
It's the same equation of how have I spent enough on security, or
right.
how do you? Yeah.
Right. And so I think part of the challenge is that, I forget who said this, but this was a couple years ago. Someone came up with the analogy that security isn't a science. It's more like a trade craft. It's like, there is no objectively right way to plumb a house. I mean, like, there's obviously certain code requirements and whatnot, but you can, you have some latitude on how and where you run the pipes, and similar thing with electrical. There's certain requirements you have to stay within, but those requirements are obviously designed to make sure your house doesn't burn down or flood or whatever. But it's not a perfect analogy, but maybe building furniture is a better analogy.
We're gonna let it go because you're on serious drugs.
Yeah.
But if your plumbing is causing fires, we need to talk.
Hey, if you run the plumbing too close to the electrical, it could happen. All right, so we beat that one into the ground. Moving on to the next story from Data Breach Today. The topic is how the Mespinoza ransomware group hits targets. I'll let you in on the secret. It's through RDP.
That is shocking to me, and yet a brand new thing I've never. No. We've heard this 7,000 times before.
Correct, but it still happens. I mean, go to Shodan and search for OpenRDP's connections on the internet. It is.
But Jerry, what could we possibly do?
Not do that?
or I don't know, two-factor? I don't know.
I mean, there's so many different ways to solve this. Put it behind a VPN. Put two-factor in front of it. Not use a default password.
Some things are just a step too far. I think you're asking a lot.
But they point out, though, that in all seriousness, this is a real problem. A lot of organizations, especially less mature or sophisticated, or maybe mature and sophisticated organizations whose employees have decided they're going to thumb their nose at IT and set up their own way into the into the innards of the company, which is, by the way, becoming increasingly easy to do with the advent of cloud.
Indeed, we have basically commoditized shadow IT.
Yes, yes, and it's not this is not a novel thing, right? But that once you have an open RDP connection, even if it's properly authenticated, there's lots of opportunities for misconfigurations, and there's been plenty of vulnerabilities in the past. And the other point they raise in this article is that it's fairly easy, fairly straightforward if you don't have two-factor authentication to phished credentials. And then once they get in, there's some additional novelties that this particular threat actor is using, like they're using this open source, what appears to me to be a reverse proxy called Chisel. So they use that as a means to establish persistence into the environment.
It's meant to bypass outbound firewall rules and proxies and such, and it's really just an HTTP tunnel with SSL inside of it over whatever port you want.
Yep.
You can lock that down. You can monitor that. It's even proxyware, but if you're, you can do things like, if I can't decrypt it, I'm not going to let it through. There are options. They're, again, administratively laden with, a lot of overhead and baggage, but outbound firewall rules is something I don't think we do a good job with either. In general, as an industry, we're kind of, we have a one-way path. Saying, hey, if anything in can get out, but once again, we see how most of these attacks start at an endpoint, or in this case, RDP to an endpoint, or phishing to an endpoint, and then start moving around laterally. So,
yeah, I mean, so many of these attacks rely on beaconing out.
The other thing that was interesting is that, speaking of tools, that somebody in here talks about how, this organization might be less well financed because they're relying on open source tools as opposed to custom tooling. Like, well, who knows? I mean, open source tooling and built-in endpoint tools might be a good way to keep a light footprint. I don't know. I find it always suspect when some of these people try to take a TTP and try to apply some sort of intent behind that TTP.
Yeah.
And I think we have absolutely fetishized the attribution and, intent of these cyber attacks to the point where I think we're doing ourselves a disservice, but that's just my personal proverbial sandbox.
You just dissed an entire cottage industry now.
It's bigger than a cottage.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. So moving on.
The other thing real quick is these guys are also doing the extortion tactic, where before they encrypt it, they grab data and then threaten to release it.
Which is, honestly, it's surprising anymore when you hear of a ransomware attack where that's not happening.
Yeah. It seems pretty common these days. I still predict one of these days something's going to get released through a ransomware extortion about a top executive that's going to lead to federal charges against that executive. There's dirty laundry out there somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I'm predicting that.
I think it was this one actually, where they say that the bad guys actually look for certain keywords like fraud and clandestine, and so I actually think they're starting to try to find that stuff.
I should really stop giving them ideas, is what you're saying.
I think so.
Fair. Carry on.
I think that's so. I do find the happyending.bat also pretty funny.
I know kids today have no idea what .bat files are.
Old school.
Or config.sys. You don't even know.
Rolling it old school. All right, moving on. Next story comes from Krebs on Security. The title is "Want to Pay Ransomware Gangs?" Or "Don't Want to Pay Ransomware Gangs? Test Your Backups." Wow, rough day. So when I first read this, I'm like, oh my gosh, ransomware nowadays is not about backups. Like, you got so many other problems to point out. But the nuance here, which I completely agree with, is that you as an organization may have awesome backups, right? To the point where, and notwithstanding your data is exfiltrated and you're being extorted from that angle. But leave that to the side for a second. You may have great backups to the point where, like, you're confident that you don't need the decryption key. But the point they're raising in this particular article is a lot of organizations are still, even though they have robust backups and they haven't really lost any data, they're still paying the ransom because they didn't really realize how much data they had and how long it would take to get back to operations. And so the path of least resistance is to pay the ransom.
The assumption may be small individual files or sections being restored, not massive full systems times 500.
Yeah, I think historically, when we think about backups, we think about it from the perspective of losing like a PC or maybe even a data center as a result of some localized, physical event. But when you get into the world of like ransomware, it's a logical event that can affect your entire environment equally at all the same time. And so the restrictions around geography and whatnot don't come into play. And so if you have thousands of workstations that have petabytes of information, and you've got hundreds of petabytes in your data center, and you're relying on restoring from backups, like you may find that it could take years to restore that information from backup. And that's what some of these organizations cited in this article are finding. And it kind of says like there's a new dimension that we have to factor into our backup strategies, which is this kind of pan-organizational outage, and figuring out like we have to, how do we design our backup and restore capability, not only so that we have good backups and can restore like in a particular file that's lost or particular system that's destroyed, but that we can restore our entire environment in a reasonable amount of time. And that's not something I don't think many organizations do.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think you'd almost have to go full virtual. Mm-hmm. And being able to make the machine portable. I don't even want to go down that path yet. I think you and I should start a company for fast restores. I think there's a business model there.
Absolutely, it's going to be USB drives for everybody.
RestoreEfficiency.com. Let's work on that. No, you're right, and so sometimes they make hey, we've got it, but it'll take years to restore, and that's not viable. So pay the money.
Right. So, food for thought, right?
So test your restore plan.
And
somehow.
They point out that a paper walkthrough or tabletop exercise can help identify these sorts of things. But it's important for you. It's important for you, to think about this as you're running that tabletop exercise.
I think I like tabletops, but I think a lot of assumptions get made that don't bear out in the real world.
Fair.
And I think no plan survives contact with the enemy. So I still think a real world test is more valid. Now that you should do tabletops, don't get me wrong. Tabletops are good. I think you should do them. I think it helps. But I think you have to be very careful with your technological assumptions.
We can agree on that.
And that you better test those.
All right. And then the final story from tonight, a little bit of good news. That this comes from Ars Technica. The title is Kaseya gets master decryptor to help customers still suffering from REvil attack. So as we talked about on the last show, there was a very substantial attack involving the Kaseya VSA software, and a lot of their managed services customers who were using VSA to manage their respective customers were compromised and infected with REvil. And at the time, the REvil group was demanding $70 million for a master key. And I think that subsequently dropped to like $50 million. But then some strange stuff happened. Like there was some meetings between the U.S. President and the Russian president, because apparently, of course, the REvil group is alleged to be out of Russia. The REvil online presence has since gone dark, and there's no real clear indication of how Kaseya came into possession of this master key, except to say that it came from a trusted third party. When they were asked if they paid anything for it, the company's Kaseya's response is they don't have any comment on that. So, which to me says they probably did.
I do wonder, though. Typically, what we see, not typically, I shouldn't say that. Sometimes what we see is a different encryption key per, discrete organization that's hit by ransomware.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if this particular ransomware didn't do that, or if this was a master key that could unlock all the. In other words, how far would this key go? Or was it something else? We're also assuming that this came from the bad guys. What if it was a flawed encryption?
Well, that's the
implementation?
There's some other hypothesis that this was.
Yeah, we don't know. Trusted third party.
Right.
So, or they bought it. I will say I really appreciate Kaseya still stepping up to the plate to help. Right there, they got this key. They said they're doing tech support for their customers. We kind of pondered in the last show, what is their responsibility in this circumstance? And it's obvious that they're trying to help, and that's good. And so kudos to them for that. But I'm very curious where and how they got this key, and what the story is behind that, and other potential REvil ransomware infections.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of out of the gate. I got the impression that the REvil gang had set it up such that they could provide a master key to unlock all of the hundreds or thousands of end customers, or they could deal with each individual customer one at a time. So I really don't know. It's possible someone in the in the intelligence or law enforcement community was able to compromise their infrastructure, and that's why it's no longer there, and they got the keys. But again, there's no indication that other REvil victims or outside of the Kaseya ecosystem here have an ability. The other thing, by the way, that you often hear when companies pay the ransom and get a decryptor is that the decryptors usually are like really crappy and not.
Well, yeah, we've heard sometimes it takes forever to run the decryptor.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm kind of curious.
Clunky and not user friendly, and so don't really know exactly what the end customer, the end victim experiences in this. If you have systems that are still locked up, like is it an easy process? But apparently they being Kaseya has engaged another company called EMI. Was it EMI Soft, I think, to help the end customers or end victims recover using this key. So, like you said, kudos to them. It's really unfortunate that it happened, but they do seem to be pretty committed to to helping their customers, their customers and their customers' customers. So, at this point, given that it happened, it's hard to ask for a lot more, I suppose.
On the Decryptor thing, I think the ransomware games just need to hire a good product manager and adapt some agile development frameworks with some better goals, and I think they would work a lot better.
That's true. Hey,
maybe some user acceptance testing.
Right?
I mean, they got some funding. They might as well,
They do have some funding.
Make a pretty UI.
Up to like $70 million. Yeah.
I'm just saying. I mean, they could put a little effort in.
All right, that is the stories for this evening. I do appreciate everybody's willingness to stick with us, and I hope these discussions help you out. And with that, just a reminder, you can follow Mr. Kell on Twitter at Lerg, Lerg, and you can follow me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. I don't tweet as much as I used to, but I'll probably start getting back into it soon, I hope. And with that, anything else you want to say?
No, thanks as always for listening and sticking with us through our long hiatus. And hopefully we'll get on a more regular cadence here and try to provide some small amount of value to the few people who listen.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Have a great week. Bye-bye. Bye.